If you had a microscope and could look at a piece of a leaf, you would see thousands of tiny openings which branch out until the leaf has all of the materials it needs. What happens now?
All right, it's time for you to move on to exercise number 1, which I call making keyframes, setting the work area, and kicking butt. So this is very much like what I went over in the lecture, but it's a little bit more complicated and a little bit more fun, hopefully, for you to work on. It has 3 little scenarios, and I'll take you through those right now. So each one, just like with what I did, is an action that's controlled entirely by kind of an arrow thing, right? So in this first scene, the arrow would come on screen, it would grab the current time indicator and kind of move it back to frame 0 here, right? And then click on the stopwatch, which will actually, I have multiple stopwatch files here. I have blue and gray, okay? So when it clicks on it, it can turn blue, and the keyframe can come onto screen, right? It could start right there on the click. And yeah, so that's all you have to do in the first shot, but I built it as well. If you want to do some additional animation, I built a, you could do a similar thing with the rotation keyframe and stopwatch, where you can kind of change that so that lights up blue, and then there's a second keyframe which I've given you here, okay? So the way that I've set this up is that the yellow layers at the start are the ones that are on, and these pink layers here I have turned off, and those will be the ones that will get switched on during the animation, right? So I also did not mention at all, and I think this is probably a good time to do it, that color coding your layers is really, really important in After Effects, because we're all visual people. I assume you're a visual person if you're getting into animation and design. So these colors help visual people like us determine at a glance, without having to think about it too much, which is really important, you know, groupings of layers or different things about these layers that you might want to set or know for yourself. Like I've, for example, made these pink ones that are the ones that default to being off at the start. And to break up the different groups here of the different shots, I've given these kind of different color themes so that I could tell, again, at a glance, just what's going on there. So that's really important. And the way you change those colors is if you go to any layer and you see there's this little color tab here, this square of color, if you click that, it will allow you to choose from a list of, I don't know, about 10 different colors that they have here. And if you're actually very interested, there's a preference up here where you can change your labels, I think it is. Yep. And down here, what you could do is if you don't like the default like yellow color or whatever, you can click on this and change this to a different color or whatever. This is probably TMI, but just so you know, these labels are really, really useful. Okay? So moving on. So I think that describes the first shot. The second shot here is definitely the longest one. As you can see, I've given you about 8 seconds or so, or 7 seconds to get this done in, because this requires a few different actions. The first one is that the arrow will come on screen. Okay, what I want you to do is to have it select these keyframes here, one at a time obviously, and move them back to line up exactly with these other keyframes. Okay, you'll probably have to set guides to do that. And then additionally, the arrow, after doing that, will go and grab these work ends, okay, and just like the 2 boxes in the exercise that I did, kind of pull these handle edges back so that they also line up with these keyframes, okay? So just like you would do with the work area in After Effects here, I want you to kind of like line this up so that it surrounds the keyframes, right? Okay, so then in the final shot, it's your render shot. The arrow will come in and click on the button Render, and it'll change the button from gray to blue. And then, just like before in the exercise that I did, we've got this progress bar here that you will need to animate starting over here and going brrrr and filling this up, right? Awesome. I think this all should make sense. I did want to explain one other thing here, which is to get you used to the idea of working in After Effects, I have made this out of various different kinds of artwork, okay? So this top layer here is a Photoshop document, all right? This is called my noise layer, and I probably have to zoom in a little bit to show you what this is doing. It's just adding a little bit of texture. Here, if I turn this off, you see that this is just very clean and flat and vectory, and when I turn this on, it's got a little bit of grit and noise in there, okay? It makes it look a little bit nicer, I think. So we're going to leave that on the top layer. It has to be on top. So I've locked it off and put it on top, all right? In case you don't know, this little button locks and unlocks the layer. And with it locked, you can't click on it or accidentally grab it or whatever, right? So it's useful, especially because that's on top and it covers the whole screen, to leave that locked. If it's not locked, you'll always, when you click and try to click just say on the arrow, you'll be grabbing this noise layer, which, yeah, is annoying. So make sure to lock that. Additionally, I made the backgrounds for each layer in Illustrator. Okay, so this here, which I've also locked and which you should keep locked, has the little Adobe Illustrator icon, right? So actually, if you look up here in the Assets folder in the project window, you can see that I made some shots, some parts of the shots in Illustrator. That's how I've abbreviated Adobe Illustrator to AI. And PSD is my way of saying Photoshop document, right? So Photoshop and Illustrator, and I also have an MP3 in here for the end of your comp that will play the little render chime when you finish as a nice little bonus, okay? And that's all in place. I don't think you should need to change any of the timings of any of this. If you want to, you could make these shorter or longer. If you wanted to add time into the composition, you could select this and press Command K, right, which opens the composition settings window, which we've gone over before. But just say you wanted to add more time into here, you could make this like 25 seconds, for example, by adding a 2 there. And now if I pull back a little bit, I can see I'm pressing minus on my keyboard, or I could have done that using this. I can see that I now have an additional 10 seconds of kind of composition time that I could take these and, whoops, I'd have to unlock this, and I could take all these and move these down, for example, and then if I wanted more time in here, I could, with all of these selected, I could kind of hover over the end and then drag this back, for example. So if I need that to be longer, I could always do that. Just make sure that then you unlock, you know, all the other layers. For example, this background, so that it doesn't drop out. You see how once this layer ends, this is my gray background, my solid, and it's nice and on screen here, but once it ends, the background defaults to being black, which we don't want. So make sure, if you do want to add time to this, which you don't necessarily need to, that you just drag this back and probably also drag back the render chime so that it happens at the end. All right. I'm not saying you have to do that, but just in case you want to, that's how you do it. All right. So we're pretty much done here, but I did want to bring up one final point, which is I love it when students decide to take on additional animation work and maybe want to add something into the project or just go farther with it. That's totally awesome, and it shows me that you're really into it and that you're very enthusiastic about the subject, which I love. I just want to say, however, that please make sure you complete the assignments as they're originally planned first, and do all of that before going on to do anything else or anything extra. All right? That's the way I want to run this class, and I'm totally psyched about you doing extra work, but just please make sure to take everything on that I assign, okay? I hope that makes sense, and good luck with your project. I can't wait to see what you do.
If you had a microscope and could look at a piece of a leaf, you would see thousands of tiny openings which branch out until the leaf has all of the materials it needs. What happens now?